Okay, I just start recording and it's high time we start. So I'd like to welcome you all to this session. This is Academic Integrity Policies course at ELT PhD program of Çanakkale 18 Mart University. And today we have two honorary guests, Teddi Fishman and Zeenath. Of course, we wanted it very much to welcome our Tracy Brettak here, who left us a few days ago. And 2 days ago, we had a memory session on Tracy Brettak. So we would like to dedicate this session in loving memory of our Tracy. Okay, welcome again. Today we will be talking about contextual factors and their impact on academic integrity. We will be relating this session with the previous discussions that we had. As you already remember, previously we talked about the fundamental values of academic integrity, and today Teddi Fishman is here. We benefited from her work while we were talking about these fundamental values. I am sure Teddi will develop some more critical ideas related to this. And in addition, we also have Zeenath here from Dubai. Zeenath is especially joining us today because she had the opportunity to work with Tracy. So the section 3, dealing with contextual factors of academic integrity, specifically was edited by Tracy in her edited collection. So Zeenath is very knowledgeable about the topic and will be, in a way, representing our Tracy here. Today, we want to talk about grading. We would like to start our discussion with reference to grading, and we want to talk about grade inflation here. And later, we want to relate this with commercialization of higher education. Within this respect, we would like to call attention to the impact to the necessity of internationalization and interacting with the other organizations in a global manner. However, on the other hand, we would like to call attention to the dangers of some other aspects, such as, for example, global degree means. And we will try to explain what we mean by being a student today in this commercialized industry. And then hopefully if you would like to join us with your questions, we will be very happy to discuss them all together here. We don't want this session to be just a lecture, so we very much encourage you to join us with your questions and with your comments. Before we start, I'd like to briefly introduce the two champions of academic integrity, starting with Teddi Fishman. You are already familiar with International for Academic Integrity, and she spent almost the last decade to direct this organization and contributed a lot to academic integrity in a global manner. She earned her PhD from Purdue University, and she delivered several courses there. However, I'd like to call your attention that her main field is related to communication, rhetoric, and communication. So, considering the main function of language, we can say that Teddi's main field is directly related to our field of study here. And secondly, Zeenath will be joining us here. I guess I remember the name of Zeenath from 2015. It was when we were recognized as Turnitin Global Innovation Award winners. I was recognized on behalf of Europe, and Zeenath at that time was recognized on behalf of Far East,
Middle East and Africa.
The region. And later I had the opportunity to meet her several times at other conferences, and very recently I am very happy to learn that she managed to establish Academic Integrity Center at her university. Her university is a branch of an original Australian university, and as you already know, Australia is very developed in terms of academic integrity policies. So I am sure Zeenath has a lot to contribute in terms of developing academic integrity policies. Okay, this is from my side, but to provide some basic information about you. Of course, we are more than happy to receive your additions before we start, if you like. Teddi, yes, please.
Absolutely. I think the question, well, first of all, let me say that thank you very much for dedicating this session to Tracy. Tracy was not only a leader for me, she was also such a great, great friend. And the thing that I think makes her so appropriate to this work that you're conducting, Salim, is that she was so pragmatic, and it didn't matter how many challenges and how large they were. Tracy always believed that we could make a difference. And so the class that you're teaching right now is very directly related to something that was very close to her heart. So thank you very much for doing that. The question about why we grade is so very important and so little considered. And it's such a great way to start this session, because often we skip right over the purposes of grading. And for you, I'm sure that you have already considered some of the practical purposes, and you've experienced them throughout your own schooling. But the thing that I would like to introduce as kind of a thought starter is the idea that we can approach grading in a couple of ways. And one of them is to remember that grading is actually just a snapshot, and it's a very limited snapshot. And the reason that I like the metaphor of a picture, taking a photo, is that when you take a photo, there might be several dozen things going on around you, but you direct your lens at a particular thing and you focus in just on that thing, right? So it may be that, for instance, you are in a war zone and there are bombs and there are, casualties and terrible things going on all around you, and you direct your focus at one area where someone is doing well, right? And it doesn't mean that you've captured everything that's going on in the battlefield. It just means that you've looked at one particular thing and you've seen that it's doing well. And conversely, you could show a picture of Izmir, and all of the beautiful beaches and all the beautiful scenery that is around Izmir. And what you focus on is one tiny place where there's some garbage that's been thrown on the ground, right? And so, conversely to the battlefield example, where it's a lot of chaos and terrible things, and you've looked at one good thing, or you can look at a scene that has many beautiful things and looked at one terrible thing. And it's really important that we understand that, is that when we ask a student, 10 questions to demonstrate their knowledge with 10 questions, those 10 questions are all we know about what they know at that moment, right? So it may be that they know 100 things and we didn't ask them any of those things. Or it may be that they only knew 10 things and we asked them the 10 that they know, right? So that's one important thing, is that a grade is just a snapshot, a particular view that we are looking at, right? And the other thing that we should consider about grading that a lot of times people haven't considered is that, it's another metaphor, that there are two ways to use grading. Originally, grading wasn't necessary because the teacher knew how the student was doing because there was a lot of interaction, right? And as we started to increase student-teacher ratios, and as we started to need to communicate with other institutions, we needed a common language for how we were going to evaluate a student, right? And that's why we needed some kind of relatively objective and relatively standard way of evaluating students. But now the situation that we have is we look at this particular little snapshot and we can use that in one of two ways. This is my second metaphor. We can use it either as a thermometer or we can use it as a thermostat. And if we look at it as a thermometer, when you use a thermometer, or if you look at a thermometer that's on the wall, whether you're taking a temperature of a person or whether you're taking a temperature of, the atmospheric conditions, it just tells you what's going on, right? And that's all it does. Like, you look at it, it tells you what's going on right now, and that's the end of the exchange. But the way that a thermostat works, a thermostat that you'd use for your heater or your air conditioning, or the thermostat on your car that tells how much water let go through the engine. The way that a thermostat works is that a thermostat takes the temperature and then immediately provides feedback so that a change can happen, right? If your thermostat for your air conditioner says, oh, it's 85, or no, I'm sorry, it's 40 degrees, then that lets them know that you should turn on some more air conditioning. Or if it's wintertime and your thermostat says that it's 3 degrees, then you should have some more heat, right? And I would encourage you to think about grades as a thermostat rather than a thermometer. In other words, don't impart the most importance to the temperature itself, but instead impart the importance to what you are going to do in response to having taken that temperature.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful, Teddi. Very important implication. Zeenath, before we move forward, shall we encourage our participants to respond to the link that we shared? What do you think?
Right. So what I would like to do is, now Teddi's given two fantastic metaphors to why we want to grade student work, right? So if you see the link that I have shared in the chat, if you click on it, it doesn't expect you to log in or anything. It just asks you the same question and asks you to put in 3 words, right? So if you could just take a moment and do that, I will share the screen here so we can all see what you're putting in.
Oh, yay.
If I can figure out how to do this. So Salim, how do I share my web browser?
Please click on the arrow that you see just on the left of 3 dots. Arrow upside.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and then this will open share try, and then click browse, please.
I got it. Okay. There we go. Yes. So everybody can see the screen. Why do we grade a student's work? I think we've started creating a word cloud.
Yeah.
Nice. That's really nice. I'm a huge fan of the word cloud, by the way.
I know, right? So we've got reshaping teaching, providing feedback, of course, motivation, evaluating learning, communication requirements. So motivation seems to be a common word that most of you have used. That's why it's kind of in a bigger font than the rest. Achievement, place, okay, diagnose, okay, all right. Okay.
It's spot on with motivation, by the way, because it really is true that what we evaluate, it encourages the students to learn those things and signals that that's what's important.
Absolutely. Right. So like a lot of you have actually gone back and used these words. And if we actually put them into now, if we had to kind of put them into different categories and go back to how Teddi explained it, the first thing is actually we want to kind of differentiate students, right? Evaluate their work, use it as a source of motivation and a means of organizing the lessons that we are teaching, right? So the focus really isn't the grade as such, but it is more of an indication of what else is happening in your classroom, right? To decide how well we are doing in classroom, what all do we need to change? Is the student really learning what I'm trying to teach? Are we really reaching those learning objectives? Right. The other is as a gatekeeping device by academics. And Oh, I have such love-hate relationship with this word, gatekeeping, because it automatically gives you that feeling that the whole purpose is probably because it wants to differentiate, right? Differentiate and give opportunities or take away opportunities at the end of the day. And the word actually has a long history with education, because education wasn't always something that people just assumed to be the right of all, right? And although think we are at a place where we do have quite a lot of focus on education now, we must understand there's still host of countries out there, regions within countries, like groups of people within regions who still don't have access to education, right? But right from the beginning, this concept of grading came about as like a standardization to help determine who would go into this the privileged group of students who will have access to further studies, to a degree and a graduation, and ultimately be looked on as the favored people who would then be employed, right? So that is the hate part of why I don't like the word gatekeeping. But the love part of why I like gatekeeping is, if you really think about it, we do need some kind of means, or like how I'm going to go back to what Teddy said, the way you said about the thermometer, right? We need that kind of a like a some kind of a visual dashboard that tells us how are students performing, and those who are performing really well, what are their skills that they're taking forward with them, and what can we do to give them support. But then at the same time, we also want to look at, then why aren't the rest of them performing at the same way, and how can we then go forward and probably support them, right? So it works like a litmus paper test, is what I usually say. And of course, the third thing is that it is used by governments and industries, whether it comes to deciding about performances, funding programs, student loans. Now, what I would like to do is go back to the class, these the ones that we have here, and ask you guys, what do you think about grading as litmus papers for your classroom, for what do you think a university is and where it is standing in terms of student performance and looking at grades?
Okay, thank you, Zeenath. Before leaving the word to our guests, to our students, I'd like to remind you that this is foreign language teaching department.
Right.
So, indeed, at the department, at BA level, we are training EFL teachers, and the students here are at PhD program, so they are candidates of teacher trainer candidates.
Awesome.
It means that as EFL teachers, we love testing, we love grading, and we have two basic aims to do this. And maybe we will be benefiting from two main methodologies. One, discrete point, the other one, integrative techniques. By discrete point methodologies, we would like to see particular achievements of our students. For example, we deliver progress tests, in other words, achievement tests, to see how well they are progressing. Or we deliver a diagnostic test in order to identify problematic aspects. Sometimes, for example, we benefit from integrative techniques such as a placement test, where a student, for example, registers to a new school. So to find the most appropriate proficiency level, we deliver a placement test. Or at the end of the language course, for example, we deliver a proficiency test to see the overall picture. Now, my question is going to be valid for my students. Now, I'm going to encourage them to think about the national level examinations, language examinations that are conducted by ÖSYM. This is the central center responsible for national level examinations in Turkey. And question this, in terms of reliability and validity of the examinations, especially foreign language examinations that we call as YDS in Turkey, for example.
Yep.
What do you think about their reliability and validity? Please try to check this against the other proficiency examinations that are valid worldwide. Yes, Teddy, please.
That's such it's such an important thing to contextualize, like what we're talking about, and especially since Zeenath was just talking about gatekeeping and litmus tests. One of the things that I think has become more sharply in focus over the last couple of years is the extent to which the way that people are enculturated and the way that people are, either inside or outside of particular groups affects the way that they perform on tests like this. And because you are all second language teachers, that the way that people have lived their lives has a huge effect on the way that they're going to respond to questions. Yeah. One of the best examples that I can remember when I was just starting teaching and people were talking about like how you had to take into account the cultures from which students come. If there's a question on your test and it's trying to check their language, but the question is something like, if I want to get some milk, I go to and what you want the students to say is you want them to say, I go to the grocery store. But if they grew up in a rural area, they might say, I go to the barn because that's where the cows or the goats are. You know what I mean? And neither of those answers is wrong. It just depends on where the student is from. Yeah. And so if we have a right or wrong answer that either includes or excludes one of those places, then we're not actually checking their language, we're actually checking their background, right? So that's really important. And then the other thing about ESL teaching is that, back to what I said before and the snapshot, there are so many ways of expressing oneself. And when our tests are what they call objective tests, so like there's one right answer, that really limits students who are used to doing very complicated problem solving, right? So maybe I don't know the word for car, but I know the word for road and I know the word for trip, and I can make somebody I can make somebody understand me by saying, oh, I need to go on a road trip, can you assist me in finding the thing that I need? I don't have the word for car, but I let you know what I needed, right? So it's so complicated when we're talking about language, and sometimes the most creative students are actually disadvantaged.
Yes.
Thank you, Teddy. Both of them are very important. Starting from the last one, mission markable techniques. Although they are objective, on the other hand, they kill students' productivity.
Yep.
So, in a way, we need to find a way of standardization in terms of testing productive skills. So we shouldn't kill students' productive skills. And going back to your first thing, I studied the impact of cultural schematic knowledge on reading comprehension for my MA. And so it is quite important to talk about the differences between textually explicit and textually implicit questions. This is very important. I mean, when we ask a comprehension questions, we need to consider students' relevant schematic knowledge about the topic, and sometimes script-based questions or scripturally implicit questions might be misleading both the reader, the student, and the teacher. So we need to be very careful about this. Yes. If it is okay for you, then I'd like to direct the question, remind the question, our original question, to our students, especially for our students who took advanced SPSS course last semester.
I think Kari has raised her hand.
Okay.
Kari and then Miranda.
Yeah, I want to go back to your original question, Salim, about YDS and similar exams in Turkey. And this relates to the previous comment about testing productive skills, specifically testing speaking. My doctoral research looks at English medium instruction. So I'm looking at, for example, content teachers who are teaching engineering or psychology or biology. through English. And in Turkey, the requirement that they have to meet in order to lecture in English is that they have to get a certain score on this exam, the YDS exam. But as everyone in the Turkish context will know, there is no speaking component to this exam. So these lectures are essentially assessed against a grammar test, but then they're expected to go into the classroom and speak English to their students when they're teaching. So this is an example of how the policy and the exam that's developed in relation to the policy doesn't necessarily match with the skills required for the specific task, this teaching task. And so there's a mismatch there, but we can also see that it's used as a gatekeeping device because teachers who don't reach that certain score, regardless of how good or how bad they might be at speaking English, or how effectively or how ineffectively they might be at communicating content in English, still have to achieve that certain score on this grammar exam.
Yeah, that's a huge problem in so many areas. We do so many evaluations of English by grading people on how well they can either identify or exhibit grammar conformity. And the difference between someone who, and I will tell you, I'm such a grammar nerd. I used to, I had in high school a teacher who would challenge me to diagram sentences. So I love, I think it's fun and interesting and useful, but the idea that we can evaluate someone's communication skills in terms of their grammar is just incorrect. It's just incorrect. It is perfectly possible for someone who doesn't have command of grammar in a language to communicate well, and it's also perfectly possible for somebody who has command of grammar to not be able to communicate at all. Right? Absolutely. I can tell you Spanish grammar rules, and yet when I try to speak Spanish, I can only speak in present tense because that's all I can remember, right? So, that's just the truth. And it is a terrible mismatch. That's a really good point, Carrie.
Right. Miranda?
Okay, my sound is on. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, the question was about the reliability and validity of YDS when compared to the other exams. Well, YDS is, when we look at the definition of reliability encompasses test taker performance and the scoring procedures. And as such, YDS is a reliable exam because it offers enough samples for the test takers. Then test takers are familiar enough with the exam. It requires test takers to find correct answers within, and the items are also well paced. However, when we look at the face validity, the validity in general, there are several types of validity, as we know. For face validity, again, we could say that it is relatively valid in terms of face validity and content validity. But in terms of criterion-related validity, we should say that it's not so it's not a valid exam because it doesn't have correlation with language used in the target context. That's the problem with the exam. It does, as it claims, it does test vocabulary, it does test reading comprehension and language use, but it doesn't test it in the target contents because it doesn't test the speaking and the writing aspects of the language. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's...
Okay, Osgur had some raised his hand and then it went down.
I do agree with Miranda and Kari.
Okay, Hadis?
Oscar, I can only see a few people on the screen, but I've met you before, haven't I? I met you?
No, we haven't met you before.
No?
You must have seen me before in the webinar.
Yes.
Yes.
I was a moderator at the contract teaching day. You may have remembered me.
I've seen you. Yes, that's it.
Yes.
The contract teaching day. Okay.
I was the moderator
I saw
of
your face and I was like, I know him.
I was the moderator of the second and the third session.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hadis? You're still muted.
Sorry. Good morning. I was going to address the same issues as Miranda, actually, the face and content validity of those central exams conducted by ÖSYM. Actually, I wrote a paper about the YDS exam, but it has been a while. I can't exactly remember what I wrote. But I remember that ÖSYM at the Center for Central Examination claims that they measure the listening and speaking abilities of the test takers using those dialogues, written dialogues. So I believe that's a problem for face validity because it claims to measure the speaking ability, but no, it can't. It can't with finding the appropriate statement for dialogue. I don't think that is possible. And also, I would like to address to another issue. As a proficiency test, the results must give an opinion about the test taker's level of proficiency. But are all exams, all those exams, all maybe 95% of the questions in these exams are ridiculously difficult. Ridiculously difficult, really. So it is impossible for those tests to give a valid, I don't know, leveling for the test taker. We can't know if the test taker is A1 level or B1 level. Only maybe we can say that, okay, that test taker is C1 level in terms of reading skill. That's all. So I think that's another problem in our central exams for language tests.
Yep.
Thank you.
What you're talking about and what Miranda talked about together, it reminds me as if we were going to issue driver's licenses on the basis of who could build a car, right? Those two things, they're related somehow, and you should know a little bit how a car works, but being able to build a car doesn't mean you can drive, and being able to drive has nothing to do with whether or not you can build a car.
Exactly. I guess the main problem with YDS examination is they mainly benefit from scripturally implicit question. What does it mean? It means that there should be an exact match between the testers and test takers' schematic knowledge. If they don't match with each other, then we wrongly assume that the test taker does not have the proficiency in the target language. So in terms of validity, this is problematic. It seems that the examination is reliable, but when it comes to validity, definitely it cannot be considered as a proficiency examination because it does not provide an overall picture of the test takers.
Yep. And back to, the overall outline and the emphasis that you asked us to consider about globalization, like that's part of the issue is that we want to have a measure that we can give and then it'll transfer across contexts, right? When really what we need, if we actually want to measure someone's ability to communicate verbally, we need to watch them communicate verbally. Right? That would be the best test is to have people talk to a class and see how they do. But because that's expensive and time consuming, we don't want to do that. So we want a proxy for that. And whenever we start to substitute something else for the thing that we actually want to know, then what we want to know becomes, it recedes into the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that, should we move on to the next point of discussion, grade inflations? So, when you think about grade inflation, right, there's this amazing graph that Salim has put in the slides. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this before we actually went into anything else. It talked about private universities and public universities and how you can actually see that over a period of like 20 years, the inflation seems to have gone exponentially higher in private schools than in public schools, right? So keeping that in mind, I wanted to just open up the floor and discuss a little bit about. So we understand what grade inflation is. Just like inflation of the currency, you see it going up and up and up. What a person who gets a grade A today probably wouldn't have managed even a B 10 years ago, right? Because it's probably, the perception is that, it's more easily given out. There's more pressure for teachers to give higher grades and maintain that standard, and then show that no, we are actually producing more A grade students, rather than not having students at that level or that bar that we are setting as teachers or academics in a university. So taking into consideration things like the social and economic factors of a student, political background, and of course the policies. Let's talk a little bit about, is there anything to really worry about with grade inflation if everybody everywhere is doing it? And as a global community of higher education and students in higher education, so if everybody everywhere is actually inflating the grades, right? And it's not a sudden thing that has happened. It's happened very slowly over the last 20-30 years. And we can see that you go back and you will immediately see parents now coming and saying, sometimes for university students, like we face it a lot, where parents say, no, this is really difficult, it's really stressing my child out. You guys need to figure out how to make this easier, how to make this more simpler. So we know there are societal and economic factors that are pressurizing teachers, and ultimately we are ending up looking at grading in a manner that kind of takes more into consideration what we see in class than what we really see on paper. So talking from like an internationalization perspective for grade inflation, do you guys think this is something to be worried about? We'll probably start with Teddi.
Okay. Oh gosh, there's so much to here. I'm just going to throw out a couple of things in the spirit, again, of contextualization. And I'm going to say that what Zeenath said about somebody who, 10 years ago would have gotten a C and now that person expects a B, that is absolutely true. The other part of that, however, is that someone who is in college expecting that B right now may not have even been allowed to have been in college a couple generations ago, right? So that's the thing that we have to also consider, is that as we have opened the gates to more and more people, we have struggled with how we are going to evaluate all these different kinds of folks, with different kinds of backgrounds, and how we're going to evaluate them in comparison to each other. I mean, one of the dirty little secrets of higher education is that in the more privileged institutions, it's always been true that people would get passing grades whether they, earned those grades or not, right? That's just a fact of higher education. And in different societies, it operates in different ways, but I haven't seen yet the society in which it didn't operate, right? That the privileged people who go to the very privileged schools, they know once they get in that school, they're probably going to graduate unless they do something absolutely disastrous, right? In the United States, they call it a gentleman's B, because even if they do almost nothing, they're going to get that B and they're going to pass, right? So we have this thing that we have been weighing, which is that as you democratize education, as more and more people get to have it, then you have to account for different levels of preparation. And to evaluate a student, for instance, who has had, maybe a student who was raised in very challenging circumstances, they had, several siblings and both parents had to work and they didn't have much help with their homework, you're going to evaluate that student's preparation against somebody who had, maybe 2 siblings at the most, and their parents were both very involved in their schooling and they gave them all the test preparation and all of the academic enhancements. Like, how are you going to evaluate those 2 individuals against each other? One of them had to make their own way and do their own learning, and the other one, maybe they're a great student, but they didn't have to struggle for those things. And so, even the idea of inflating someone's grades assumes that we know what the grades should be at the outset. That's a very difficult thing. Do you grade upon that snapshot that you look at, or do you grade upon the amount of improvement that the person has made, or do you grade them on their ability to assimilate new knowledge very quickly? It's just really challenging to even think that we know what the base point is. And then the other thing that I would say about that is, with respect to gatekeeping, if we are going to consider people's performance, we also have to consider the amount of support and assistance that they have gotten to put in that performance. They're very related, but we don't do a good job of doing that so far.
Great. Celine?
I guess, for example, from my point of view, I'm teaching academic writing, and if I'm considering my own understanding of grading here, okay, I'm grading my students, I am scoring their papers. Shall I focus on the product, or I focus on the process? So for writing, for example, that should be the key question. Previously, I guess we focused more attention on the product. However, it seems that we are giving more emphasis to process here. And students' management of the process, solving the problems that they are encountering, they should also be taken into consideration. So from my point of view, what do I do? Rather than simply focusing on the written product at the end of the semester, I start encouraging my students to submit drafts. And then I encourage my students to exchange their assignments, their previous drafts with each other. I manage peer feedback. So they exchange peer feedback with each other. They provide feedback. While they are providing feedback, they need to revise their background knowledge about the topic. So, they will be acting like teachers, commenting, criticizing the written work. So they will be learning while providing feedback. So in terms of scoring, I take their feedback quality into consideration, because this is the process approach. I am trying to see the overall picture. I'm not just trying to focus on the written product. So I'd like to see their achievement, what they did throughout the semester. Maybe it could provide better ideas about, for example, individual achievements throughout the semester might be differentiating, because students they will progress in their own speed. So this will allow more room for more reliable and valid assessment, I guess. And when it comes to the inflation, if it is happening slowly, maybe it could be affordable, because in a 20-year period, for example, if it is becoming to that level from this, then the other institutions, I mean, the governments, schools, teachers can make necessary arrangements with this inflation. However, if this is happening in a night, I mean, in a year, for example, it could be problematic, because the other institutions will not be able to arrange their regulations within the speed of inflation. So this would cause a disaster.
Yeah,
Right.
that's one of the reasons that some of the recent reforms, like having institutions rank their students, like rather than saying, you know, you get an A and you get a B, like if you are out of 300 students, you are student number 75 in the rankings, like that might be a more meaningful measure than A, right?
Right. Because this is why I started with that graph, and I said to keep that in mind, because if you look at public and private, there are more students in private universities getting A's than students in public university. Because you know the assumption with that A would be that that student is better, stronger, performing than the student, you know, the ones who are not managing those A's in public universities. But is that really true? Is that really true of what the capacity of those students really are? Because if the inflation hasn't hit the public schools at the same rate that it has private schools, because you know private schools are more commercial, you know, the more about, like what Teddy said, making sure everybody passes and everybody's getting that next grade, right? So automatically you'll see that the public school students then become at a disadvantage when they're graduating, but theirs is probably more hard earned. If you really think about it from that perspective. Oscar, you'd raised your hand.
Thank you, Zeenath. I want to talk about one reason of this great inflation from the policy perspective. But this policy I'm going to mention here is not a legal or an official policy, but it's a hidden, unwritten, and negotiated policy among primary and secondary school managers. I'm talking about the Turkish context, by the way. These managers believe that when students get low scores, they may subject to a kind of investigation by the Ministry of Education. So they encourage teachers to inflate the grades, student grades. That's one of the problems. That was the problem that I had experienced during my when I was working as an English teacher at Ministry of Education. Nearly all the managers ask teachers to inflate the scores. I think to prevent this, we should encourage accountability. Our managers are afraid of being accountable. Accountability is not something bad. If you do everything right and your students get low marks, there's nothing to be afraid of, I think. Yeah. But the problem is that our managers do not feel accountable, I guess.
Özgür, I guess the issue is not only limited with the pressure from the ministry. I guess the managers are under pressure from the families, because these scores that students are receiving will be providing basis for higher education. I mean, we will be using these scores for further education. So it means that they will have an impact on the future of the students. So families also are pressuring teachers to give higher scores to the student assignments.
Right. I know there are quite a few people who raised their hand, but we've just got 30 minutes, Salim. So should we continue with the discussion or move on with the next topic?
You decide.
Okay, I think we will move on because we do have a couple more topics to hit. And we can come back. Yes, Teddy.
Your hands up. Remember what you were going to say, because I would love to have the discussion.
And put it in the chat, please. Put the comments on the chat as well, please, so we can have those to get back to. Okay, so the next topic is looking at commercialization of higher education, right? So if we talk about commercialization, we have to first bring in capitalism. Capitalism, again, you know, it's one of those things that now after so many years and so many generations, we go back and we criticize it and we say it's probably not the best thing because it's just made the rich the richer and poor poorer. What is capitalism? You know, it's just a simple definition that I've just put there, a very common one that talks about creating products or services, you know, taking it from the government and privatizing that whole concept, right? And if you think about capitalism and education, it has had a huge impact, because all of a sudden we see education as a product, not just something that's going to be helping students uplift their life and knowledge, but rather something, a service and a product that we are actually selling to students, right? And what does that mean? This beautiful figure that Salim shared from the book, I'm going to go through. So if you talk about it from the perspective of the macro environment, it is how capitalism has impacted everything in the economy and the society. And that has then, trickled down to, of course, the institutional culture. You've got fast food restaurants that are coming in, athletics is such a big thing now, right? And you've got scholarships, and you've got people using those scholarships to actually graduate from universities, things like that. And the level of competition that actually that has given rise to. At the institutional level, once you've come, you see this capitalism coming into the university, you see then the impact on the campuses itself, like from faculty research to collaboration to the kind of need for increase in revenues, and the crazy competition that you see between universities trying to grab students any way they can. And the latest one, I think, with COVID-19 has been the scholarships that universities have been giving out, 20%, 30%, blanket scholarships we are giving out. I'm not sure why they're calling it scholarship. This is more like a discount that they're actually giving. But because it's an academic, context, they want to use those terminologies to grab students. And ultimately, you look at how it is impacting students themselves. And when they see all of this around them, this whole concept of how the university is selling itself, right? Whether it's with mascots or with having slogans, and the kind of values the institution might have something written down, but it might be actually following something very different. I remember this 2 years ago in UAE. Annually we have this exhibition, student university exhibitions, where universities from across the world come in and they set up shop, and then they talk to parents and stuff. And there was this one university in big, it said 50% of our students get scholarship, and that was their selling point, right, compared to anybody else in that exhibition hall. What I was amazed at was a lot of parents were actually going to find out how their child could get that scholarship, right? Because it's called scholarship, it's more prestigious rather than saying 50% discount, right? But what is the university really selling, and how is commercialization really impacting integrity? So that's what I would like us to now discuss. So the floor is open.
I guess, thank you.
Salim?
I guess the issue is different at our institution, because this is a state school, but for your school, this is a private school. So I guess we can visualize some basic differences between state schools. Of course, depending on the country, of course, there might be some differences, but I guess the main issue here is related to whether we are talking about a state school or a private school. Because
Yes.
when it comes to a private school, it becomes more commercialized. So things are becoming more strange. What about the others? What do they think about, especially considering the state schools in Turkey? Private schools in Turkey.
So
Not
Miranda's raised her hand.
necessarily universities, but also what about high schools and primary schools as well?
Miranda?
You're muted, Miranda.
Miranda, you're still muted? Yeah.
Okay, sorry
There
for
you
that.
No worries.
I've had extensive experience working for private schools, private high schools in Turkey, the ones that pitch the private universities abroad, especially in the United States and United Kingdom, sometimes other European countries as well. Prestige was based on the numbers of the students who enroll to those universities and the scholarships that they get. So this, what you explained, really goes hand in hand with the situation in those private schools, because the students and the parents mainly were concerned about the grades of the students and about their that would even affect the curriculum, the design of the curriculum, actually, because we would have honor classes being open. You know, if the students are getting prepared for the Ivy League, then there were honors classes, which was really a top, you know, class beyond their levels. And then students preparing, taking tutoring lessons, you know, on different subjects and getting all this support and assistance, external support and assistance, which really wasn't being graded. But their mere performance on the test was being graded as if it was only theirs. So there are several issues there and invisible things that are tolerated. And as Özgür said, unwritten policies between managers and parents, in this case especially, which you know, exist in, let's say, the most prestigious schools in private schools in Turkey.
Kari?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that I think that Miranda raised a lot of very good points about the differences between public and private schools, particularly at the secondary level. One thing that I want to add too is the ways in which these discrepancies between public and private are made worse during this COVID-19 crisis. I think we see this especially in Turkey, where when private schools have more resources and they have more flexibility in terms of how they're going to implement their education. And this is not just true in Turkey, but you know, I think since the majority of us are in Turkey, we're seeing this example. But private schools are able to advertise as having, you know, quote unquote, safer protocols, being able to, you know, implement hand sanitizing stations and temperature testing in a way that public schools are not. They might also have the resources to provide students with either tablets or some kind of electronic device to carry out classes, or they might even have the flexibility to provide some kind of face-to-face support in a way that public schools are just not able to. So that's another example of how private schools might be able to advertise themselves as able to provide better education, and they might actually be able to do so. But the other concern then is who has access to this type of education, which students or which parents are able to send their children to schools with these resources, particularly during, you know, these pandemic times, and what effect might that have in, you know, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, when these, you know, young children are then entering university or applying for jobs afterwards. So there's I think there's repercussions to this discrepancy between public and private.
Absolutely. Teddi?
I would just go back to what you said about the effects of capitalism on education. And one of the things that we have done across many, many different countries and cultures is we have made education a means to an end rather than the end itself. Rather than becoming educated, what people want are the grades or the diplomas or the certifications. And I'll give you one more metaphor, just because I think metaphors are really helpful in thinking about things like this, is that when we do that, it's as if someone took a trip around the world just to get the passport stamps, right? Yes. And they didn't pay attention. They didn't have any of the experiences, and the experiences they did have, they didn't try to remember. All they wanted was to get the grades, or all they wanted was to get the passport stamps. And that's what students are doing. And it's partially because we have given them the message that they need the grades to get the diplomas, they need the diplomas to get the good jobs, they need the, you know, it's a means to an end rather than becoming educated, because that is how you become a self-actualized human being and able to participate in public life and things like that.
And let's not forget, you know, the moment we commercialize education, you know, then there are not our students, they're our customers. Right. And when you start thinking of students as customers, then they demand, you know, what are they demanding? They're demanding the grades, they're demanding the degree, because at the end of the day, that's a product that they're buying, you know, because that's how they're seeing it. Right. And that in itself raises so many red flags where integrity is concerned, because then how do you go turn around and tell a customer they're wrong? Because remember, customers are never wrong. Customer is always right. Right. So where do you draw the line then if you're going to be commercializing education? Hattis, you had raised your hand.
Actually, I was just going to address to the same exact issue just. So yes, actually with the commercialization of education from a Turkish perspective, of course, we're just selling diplomas, we're just selling degrees.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Well, and it makes
This
sense.
is where
to
it
students.
has landed in Turkey.
Yeah, it makes sense to students. If it's just a means to an end, why wouldn't you get it in the most efficient way possible, right? That's just a rational thought process. So that's why it's important for us to disrupt that idea that you've just paid for something that you can take away, right? This is something that should have an effect on you. Kubilay, did you have your hand up?
Yeah,
So
I
yes,
Yes.
I also wanted to talk about academic capitalist regime. Okay, maybe we don't feel such things like governance or managerial expertise like others do in other countries. But of course, we outsource our services very much in Turkey. But I think we are kind of a little bit advantageous in terms of that things like managerial expertise or maybe governance rather than shared one. So that's one of the things that I wanted to add for the topic.
Okay. All right. So moving on to the next part, which is like you talk about commercialization, then we talk about capitalism, then we have to obviously then talk about globalization, because globalization is kind of what capitalism fueled globalization, globalization fueled capitalism. So when you then think of globalization of education, and that's a whole different area or can of worms, if you like, that we have opened up, right? So when we say globalization, what do we really mean of education, right? So we've obviously got this tremendous amount of student mobility that's happening. Students are getting their higher education done somewhere else, but they've got their schooling done somewhere else, like high school and middle school and secondary school has been done somewhere else, and then they apply and then they get into universities in completely different regions, not even the same country or the same region, but completely different regions. What does that mean for what kind of values they're bringing with them? What kind of academic skills, knowledge, and prior training are they bringing with them into their next phase of their education life? Faculty mobilities again. I'm a Bangladeshi sitting in UAE teaching in an Australian university. I think I'm the perfect example of globalized education, right? So again, you talk about teachers who are coming from different backgrounds, who know things differently, who have taught things differently, who have different expectations out of students when they are in classrooms. Looking at universities that are now, joining hands for collaborations and partnerships, expanding institutional programs, having satellite or branch campuses like my university has. It's an Australian university from Sydney, Wollongong, and I'm sitting here in UAE for the last 20 plus years in this campus. Institutional training and development programs, same thing, looking more at global health, looking at technology and policies, and then having that partnership between different universities across regions joining hands to work together towards this. There are, of course, fantastic advantages to this, right? We are all global citizens at the end of the day. So having globalized education really helps. And that knowing that, yes, I have the opportunity to work somewhere else or study somewhere else, broaden my views, broaden my understanding, all fantastic. But then what does that really then mean for integrity, right? When you think about what Teddi has said, that when we commercialize education, we are then looking at the whole aspect of students looking at how can I make this easier for myself, and lot of times students will come back and think of that question because they are faltering, maybe because they don't have enough know-how. They might not come from a background which has expose them to, let's say, academic writing. I know students who come from education systems in schools where they're taught rote learning, memorize dots, full stops, exclamations, and you need to repeat exactly that same thing into your exam paper. An examiner expects to see that exact same paragraph in every student paper. So when a student comes from a background like that, but they've joined, let's say, an Australian university or a Turkish university, UK or US or Canada, right? There's that automatic expectation that they're going to know academic writing and they're going to know what plagiarism is or what citations are, right? So I want to just quickly talk maybe to everybody about what are your thoughts on the impact of globalization on integrity values that we are actually instilling in students.
Thank you, Zeenath. On one hand, we try to encourage internationalization and encourage cooperation, but on the other hand, we need to consider the cultural impact. Especially, we will be talking about some international organizations, relevant organizations, and their role. And I'd like to call attention to the birth of European Network for Academic Integrity. Why we have this network? It was in 2015 conference in Brno. We decided that, okay, we need such an organization. Why? Because we are academics coming from different disciplines, coming from different countries. We are talking about some fundamental values of academic integrity. However, depending on our field and depending on our culture, there might be some differences in our understanding of academic integrity. So we need to focus on and agree on, have consensus on some key terminologies. Therefore, that was the main purpose behind the scenes for the establishment of European Network for Academic Integrity. If we come together as researchers who are committed to the development of academic integrity, we can work together, provide some educational, pedagogical materials so that we can support higher education institutions to develop their academic integrity policies and follow the standards. So this is a good example. I guess the other organizations, the other international organizations are also providing this, but we need to question our understanding and sometimes misconceptions. For example, at many Anglo-Saxon universities or at Western universities, Chinese students are accused of plagiarism. And many international students, before they register any course, probably the lecturers will start teaching them with some misconceptions. Okay, he's coming from China, he's coming from Pakistan, he's coming from India, he's coming from Turkey. So probably we will be experiencing some issues related to plagiarism concerns, for example. So we need better understanding of cultural differences and on common terminology with regards to internationalization here, I guess.
Teddi?
I would just say that this discussion also harkens back to the very beginning about why we grade.
Yes.
In a perfect world, I would say that the teachers could evaluate their students on a basis of competency or, not yet competent. Like those would be the two grades that we would assign. But because we are so international, we have to have a lingua franca for people to talk to. Like, I want to come to your Turkish university. You need to be able to look at my transcripts and have an idea of my ability. So this is kind of a tethering point that grounds us to having to come up with a common language so that we can communicate across cultures about what students actually know. And the other point that Salim just made about the stereotypes, this is one of the things that we talk to students about a lot, but it isn't completely under their control. We do each culture and each individual institution and each individual person within an institution, we have some biases that we might not even be aware of that inclines us to look at particular students or students from a particular culture because that's what we expect them to do. And it's very hard for us to negate our implicit biases, but it's really important that we remember that, first of all, not everybody in any culture is going to be indicative of the stereotype we hold, but also that the stereotype might be based on something that we don't understand, right? Mm-hmm. So we're looking at it one way, but there's another factor. And then the last thing that I would say, I've spoken way too much and taken more than my share of time, is that when we look at students and we say, oh, they lack integrity because they did X thing, often it's not a lack of integrity, but kind of a battle of integrity, right? So maybe the student is trying to weigh, is it more important that I don't help somebody cheat, or is it more important that I share with my my classmate the things that I have and the advantages that I have, right? That's not a lack of integrity. That's a trying to figure out which value is more important. And so it's really important that we look at it from that kind of standpoint, that they're not necessarily doing something that they see as wrong, but having to choose between two things that both have some correct component and some incorrect component.
Oscar?
Perfect contribution. Please, Zeenath, before we move forward, I'd like to acknowledge that value. Okay, values education. And luckily in Turkey, at primary school, in the curriculum, we have values education. And Özgür, in his PhD thesis, now reviewing policies. Indeed, in Turkey, we don't have such policies, but global policies for the development of academic integrity at K-12 level. So Özgür, this will be a key component, I guess, for you, values education and how we can incorporate academic integrity, fundamentals of academic integrity into values education in terms of our understanding of academic integrity. Okay.
Fantastic. Oscar?
Hocam, thank you. I'm noting down these issues. I want to comment on the relationship between internalization and academic integrity, actually. Zeenath, I like your analogy. Capitalism sees students as customers, clients. And I believe that internalization is a tool of capitalism, because internalization is some kind of broadening the market, I guess. If you are international, you are likely to have more customers, because when it's about internationalism, capitalism is involved, and when capitalism is involved, it's likely to see more misconduct, I think. And academic integrity is actually a gatekeeper here to prevent the misconduct, because in an international setting, it's more likely to control the misconduct, and academic integrity helps us to be the gatekeeper of misconduct in an international setting.
Fantastic point. Hedis?
When you just typed stereotypes there's the first thing that came to my mind was the foreign students we have, because in sake of internationalization, I'm speaking on my context, of course, just in the sake of internationalization, just to be able to say that we are an international university, we admit foreign students way more easier than the Turkish students. And because they are so easily admitted, they do not actually, how can I put that, value what is offered here, because I work at a state university and the education we offer is free. So they believe that they can change departments as they like. The government has to pay them funding. They have to fund them somehow. And they have some kind of sense that they are free to do anything at the university. So I personally have experiences with that kind of students, actually. It is very difficult to motivate them, really difficult. And it also affects my other students, of course, because they're not very focused on what I'm doing, what we are trying to do in the classroom. And then this is a problem, I think. Yes, we have this stereotype at my school as, I'm ashamed to say that, but we have the serious problem.
And let's not forget, it's not just about once they're actually in the university and then, what they're doing in the assignments. Even the process of getting into the university, the admission criteria that they have, right? They're kind of standardized. So if you come from O level, A level, we expect you to have these many grades, these many letters, right? If you come from Swiss background, the IB baccalaureate, this is the band that we are expecting. If you come from, so, you know, they've kind of, there is kind of this understanding that if you're coming from these different backgrounds, these are the levels that we expect. And if you actually look at that admission criteria, then you might sometimes find students coming from a background where they've done 13 subjects compared to students who've come from a whole different education background with just 4 subjects at that level, right? So how are we even saying that they are at the same level? The kind of knowledge each student is bringing into a classroom, right? And then suddenly we are telling them, you guys are all at the same pace. This is a clean slate, and here you go. This is the fresh content that we are introducing to you. In the process, we are not taking into consideration that they're actually coming from very different backgrounds of education and education prior knowledge. Right? And some student might be at an advantage when they join that class, and some student automatically will be at a disadvantage. And then they will be at a disadvantage because of their academic skills that they haven't got. So a student who has already got these skills, he or she is already, let's say, if we say there's a spectrum of 100, that student is already at like 30 or 40 of that subject and that classroom. Whereas a student coming from a different background might be at a 10 or a 15. So they're having to overcome learning how to write and then grasping what's being taught and then trying to figure out how to get to that grade. And then, you know, that whole concept of gain inflation kind of makes sense all of a sudden, because the teacher in the classroom is trying to judge how much effort the student is putting to actually manage that, you know, understanding of that concept and then, you know, being tested on it. So moving forward, very quickly, Salim just touched upon the importance of why we need these international bodies, because of course we want this common platform. We want there to be a common understanding of you know, definitions and terminologies and policies, right? But what we want to then think about also is the impact really of globalization and commercialization. Global degree mills, essay mills, which are coming up and offering degrees, offering theses, offering to write assignments for them. This is something that happens everywhere. There is a global understanding of this, especially since 2015, when there was this huge scandal in Australia with a number of universities. Australia took the lead after that, actually, and recently last year they announced they now have a law which says, you know, companies that are actually going to be promoting and selling degrees and you know, diplomas and assignments will get into trouble with the law. There are a host of international projects that are researching this area right now. Okay, and that kind of takes me to the question that I want to ask the class, is what does it mean to be a student today? This is specifically to the students. What does it mean to be a student? One word. Give me one word that comes to mind when I ask that question. What does it mean to be a student today? You can put it in the chat. You don't have to say it out loud.
Or a sentence, if a sentence is easier than
if a sentence is easier.
Well, if I take my own students into consideration, I think university student, being a university student means socialization to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is the most important thing for them, is what I mean.
And I think that's always been true to some degree, right? Like the first thing that you learn when you come to any school or any university is how to learn, right? You learn what's expected of you. So it's always a process of socialization. That's a great start.
Yep. I love that word, socialization.
Especially in COVID era, face-to-face socialization or digital socialization. Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to revise our understanding of socialization because of involvement of social media and also COVID issues, I guess. We need to revise our understanding as well.
Well, and that's cultural aspects that you guys talked about last week are so important to academic integrity, because if the student comes to university or comes to a school and learns that honesty and trust and doing one's own work are valued, then that's one message. But if a student learns that the other students respect the people who can do as little work as possible and get away with cheating, that's another message, right? And they're always going to take those cues from each other more than anything that we say.
Absolutely.
Teddy, last week we referred to Makabe and a quote from Makabe. He referred to his own experience with academic integrity in his chapter and indicated that he received a course pack when he registered the university. So it was a very important message for him because at that time he realized that, okay, the university is giving importance to the development of fundamental values of academic integrity. So it is very important. You touch a very important point here. We need to show our students that our priority here is bringing individuals who are developed in terms of academic integrity to the society. This is a very important message.
Absolutely. And often students have never, and they haven't even thought about the idea that when we ask them to write a paper, the important thing is not the paper. The important thing is that they are learning how to become scholars, right?
Absolutely.
They haven't thought about that. Their focus is on the paper and the grade. Our focus is on developing them. And so if we articulate to them, and especially if they hear it in class after class after class, that, you know, this is why we're doing this, not because we want a bunch of papers. The last thing I want is a huge pile of papers. What I want to know is that you guys can write better now than you could 3 weeks ago in this class.
Right.
And McCabe is an important figure, Celine. Thank you for that.
Miranda?
What does it mean to be a student today? I just would like to answer it from my context, maybe not even my context, maybe from a sort of more general output. I think it's about, basically, it's about making the right choices. Making the right choices in terms of, do I remain loyal to the values that I've been taught? We are all taught certain values all across the world, and those values are in many ways, they are common. And then do I act bravely or not? Or do I embrace the cultures, the different cultures? Again, in all contexts, we have different cultures. Do I embrace those different cultures positively or negatively? Do I learn from my mistakes or not? Again, you know, it's about those choices. And it's about, you know, learning this, having that sort of awareness that there are certain choices we can make in this lifelong learning journey.
Yep. And we can make that more possible for students if we allow them a little room to make mistakes and still not fail catastrophically.
Absolutely. And this graph that Salim shared actually captures the essence of what it's like to be a university student, right? Because there's so much that's thrown at them at that age where they may not have necessarily been taught time management skills. They may not have been taught social skills, socialization skills, or how to juggle social life versus work life versus, you know, leisure time, things that they actually learn when they're in university, right? Because this is where they learn to become independent and they're learning to figure out what is more important, what is less important. And of course, giving you know, importance to their values that they brought with them. That takes me to, why do students cheat? There have been variety of studies done over the years, and I'm sure you have come across some during your the previous lessons that you guys have already done. I will just reflect on 3 here. One is the factor model that I had worked on, which was quite interesting because when I started, I thought technology was the thing that was really propelling students to cheat more in the, you know, 21st century. Lo and behold, my thesis proved my hypothesis wrong. It showed technology did not have a positive or a negative impact on students cheating. So it wasn't, they weren't any more or less likely to cheat because of technology. What did have an impact was the university's policies and practices, teachers' attitudes, parents' attitudes, and assessment practices, right? So interesting to think that, you know, things that we think are so important can take a backseat because there are other forces that are working around us. A study from Salim's paper really looked at why male students plagiarize and why female students plagiarize, right? Some are similar, but a lot of them are very different reasons why the two genders approach plagiarism. Brimble talked about a few reasons why students cheat, from changing attitudes to perception of fairness, the language skills that they bring to them, into it, the internet and the technology, curriculum relevance, and so on. So now I want to, because we are almost out of time, just very quickly go back to Teddi. What are your thoughts on why students cheat?
I think there are several main reasons why students cheat. But I would say that they can fall into several categories. One of them is a feeling of unpreparedness, and that one tends to be, what's the word? It increases over time. So like if you don't know how to do this assignment and then you cheat on this assignment, well, when the next assignment comes, you haven't worked out how to do the building blocks for this one, so you're going to cheat more, right? So feeling unprepared. Another one, though, is a feeling that it is acceptable amongst the group to cheat, right? If you think that your peers won't mind if you cheat.
Yes.
And then another one is that what you're learning is not valuable. And that turns out to be the case or that's at least what students say in a number of cases. And I would say that's partly not understanding why they need the knowledge, but also us not articulating why they need the knowledge. And then the last one I would say is often a mixed match between what we think is reasonable for them to learn and what they think they can possibly learn, right? And that's another one where we actually have to examine whether what we're asking them is reasonable, because sometimes it's not, right? And teachers often hate it when I say, A, we're not articulating the reasons why they need to learn these things, and B, sometimes what we ask them to do, it's not humanly possible. So, of course, they're trying to do something else. And that's, I wouldn't say that those are the two major reasons. I think that it is mostly a combination of them not feeling like they have the skills that they need to do it, and feeling like it's acceptable in their situation to do it. But there are definitely some things that we can do as teachers to help them know that we are trying to help them develop skills that they're going to learn later, or they're going to need later, and also making sure that what we're asking them to do is something that's possible for them in their situation to do.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Salim?
Zeenath, as teachers, we are responsible for the prevention of academic misconduct, and we shouldn't encourage our students to cheat. But it doesn't necessarily mean that don't cheat.
Yeah.
So if there is a mismatch between, as a teacher, your outcome and the testing methodology, then it means that you are encouraging your students to cheat.
Yeah.
If you do not provide feedback to your students, it means that as a teacher, you encourage your students to cheat. So as teachers, we need to very carefully design our curriculums, our syllabuses, so that we provide feedback to our students for better development. We familiarize them with the academic integrity values, fundamental values, and then we help them. We are there to help them to develop better. We need to show this to our students, and then we need to develop expectations. Of course, sanctions and well-developed institutional policies, they are very important, but as individuals, at least, there are a lot we can do to encourage our students to follow the fundamental values of academic integrity.
Absolutely. Miranda, you had your
expectations is so important.
Yeah, so important.
Because there are only two messages we can send about academic integrity, right? Either we tell them explicitly that it's important, or if we don't tell them that it's important, we are telling them implicitly that it's not important.
It's not important. Absolutely. Miranda, you had your hands raised?
My hand remained up since the last.
Okay, all right. So with that, we actually come to the end of this session. So just a quick wrap up. Obviously, you can see when we talk about contextualization of academic integrity, there's so much that actually goes into defining for a student what is right and what is wrong, implicitly and explicitly, right? The more commercialization we see, the massification of education that we see, there's a lot more chances of blurring that line between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, right? The more we start seeing students as customers, we kind of tell them, go find ways to get that degree at the end of the day, right? So if that means going to an SML for a student, that means going to an SML if he can afford it. In the real world, when you're in a company and you're working and you have to get something done, you're expected to get it done in the quickest, fastest, cheapest possible manner, not necessarily in the best possible manner that is going to be suitable to you or the company, right? All companies are looking for these three things. So if we commercialize education, if we are going to be looking at it as a product, we are going to be facing this problem constantly, where students are going to think it is about the degree and not really about the learning process, which they should really be focusing on. Right. And I would actually like to conclude with this statement from Tracy. This is what she had said in her closing statement in her keynote speech at our 2016 conference, where Teddi actually was also one of our keynote speakers. So she said, we are confronting new and serious academic integrity challenges that require new responses. Universities across the globe need to commit to a systematic, holistic, and sector-wide approach, which makes integrity central to all areas of university life, including scholarship, teaching, learning, and research. This requires a commitment of resources and willingness to be transparent and accountable, and that the risk to the reputation of all of our university and sectors is too real to be complacent. So these are some of the references that were given in the slides themselves. And with that, we come to the end of today's class. Thank you so much, everybody. Salim, on to you.
Thank you, Zeenath, and thank you, Teddi, especially for your special thanks joining us today with this very important session. It was so mind-inspiring session for all of us. And Teddi, it's almost 4 a.m. in the morning for you. So,
my gosh.
for you for joining us with such short notice. And thank you, Zeenath. Thank you a lot for moderating the session and contributing to our understanding of the issue here. We learn a lot, and I guess my students and the other colleagues are also happy to welcome you here.
Thank you.
For further cooperation opportunities altogether, because we have a problem of academic misconduct, and we will be able to solve the issue by cooperating with each other, I guess. Thank you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I can't wait to be in Turkey again in person.
I know.
Soon. Let's think about the next opportunity.
Yes.
Meeting in person again. Thank you all. I'm stopping the recording now. It will be available for your access